ready to tell you.
The Iroquois Theater fire was a catastrophic building fire in Chicago, Illinois that broke out on December 30th, 1903, during a performance attended by 1,700 people. The fire caused 602 deaths and 250 non-fatal injuries. It ranks as the worst theater fire in the United States, surpassing the carnage of the Brooklyn Theater Fire of 1876, which claimed at least 278 lives. For nearly a century, the Iroquois Theater Fire was the deadliest single-building disaster in American history. Only the destruction of the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, claimed more lives in a disaster affecting an American building when 1,466 office employees died in World Trade Center 1 and 626 office workers in Tower 2, with the additional loss of life of over 400 firefighters and public safety professionals in both buildings.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward. And freedom will be defended.
Despite being billed as absolutely fireproof, the Iroquois Theater, which opened a month before the fire, exhibited numerous deficiencies in fire readiness that contributed to the high death toll. Some of these deficiencies were known by city officials tasked with public safety. The resulting scandal resulted in changes in building safety codes and code enforcement in the United States and throughout the world. The fire broke out at about 3:15 p.m. while the Iroquois presented a matinee performance of the musical Mr. Bluebeard. A broken arc lamp ignited some muslin curtains, which stage managers were unable to douse. An attempt to lower the safety curtain to contain the fire was unsuccessful. Despite attempts by Eddie Foy to calm the crowd, audience members frantically rushed for the exits, only to find the fire exits were locked or hidden. The largest death toll was at the base of stairways, where hundreds of people were trampled, crushed, or asphyxiated. Some people jumped to their deaths from the fire escapes. The Iroquois had no fire alarm box or telephone, which hampered initial rescue efforts. It is estimated that 575 people were killed on the day of the fire, dozens dying afterward. The vast majority of those killed were audience members. Two features, the safety curtain and fire dampers, were either not present or not working at the time of the fire. Other contributing factors included a lack of exit signs, emergency lighting, or fire preparedness. Doors that opened inward or were latched shut, confusing exit routes, icy fire escapes, and the presence of ornamental doors. The Iroquois Memorial Hospital was built as a memorial to the fire, and Chicago held an annual memorial service. The Iroquois fire prompted widespread implementation of the panic bar, asbestos fire curtains, and doors that open outward. The theater was rebuilt and operated until 1925, when it was replaced by the Oriental Theater. The Iroquois Theater was located at 26 West Randolph Street, between State Street and Dearborn Street. The syndicate that bankrolled its construction chose the location specifically to attract women visiting the city on day trips who would be more comfortable attending a theater near the police-patrolled Loop shopping district.
Yeah. And the wife, every time like shopping came up, she got like really excited. Oh, shopping on the internet!
How about a little online shopping, Anne?
Oh, shopping sounds good. I can never pass up a bargain.
The theater opened on November 23, 1903, after numerous delays resulting from labor unrest. And according to one writer, the unexplained inability of architect Benjamin Marshall to complete required drawings on time. Upon opening, the theater was lauded by drama critics. Walter K. Hill wrote in the New York Clipper, a predecessor of Variety, that the Iroquois was the most beautiful in Chicago, and competent judges state that few theaters in America can rival its architectural perfections. The Iroquois had a capacity of 1,602 with 3 audience levels. The main floor, known as the orchestra or parquet, had approximately 700 seats on the same level as the foyer and grand stair hall. The second level, the dress circle or first balcony, had more than 400 seats. The third level, the gallery, had about 500 seats. There were 4 boxes on the first level and 2 on the level above. The theater had only one entrance. A broad stairway that led from the foyer to the balcony level was also used to reach the stairs to the gallery level. Theater designers claimed that this allowed patrons to see and be seen regardless of the price of their seats. However, the common stairway ignored Chicago fire ordinances that required separate stairways and exits for each balcony. The design proved disastrous. People exiting the gallery encountered a crowd leaving the balcony level, and people descending from the upper levels at the orchestra level patrons in the foyer. The backstage areas were unusually large. Dressing rooms were on 5 levels, and an elevator was available to transport actors down to the stage level. The fly gallery, where scenery was hung, was also uncommonly large. After the fire, the Iroquois Theater was renamed and reopened as the Haydn-Baymon's Music Hall in September 1904. In October 1905, it was rechristened as the Colonial Theater. It remained active until the building was demolished in 1925. In 1926, the Oriental Theater was built on the site. In 2019, the Oriental Theater was renamed the Nederlander Theater. Fire readiness deficiencies noted before the fire. Despite being billed as absolutely fireproof in advertisements and playbills, numerous deficiencies in fire readiness were apparent in the theater building. An editor of Fireproof magazine, that's a real page-turner, toured the Iroquois during construction and noted the absence of an intake or stage draft shaft, the exposed reinforcement of the proscenium arch, the presence of wood trim on everything, and inadequate provision of exits. Chicago's Fire Department, CFD, Captain Patrick Jennings performed an unofficial tour of the theater days before the official opening and noted that there were no sprinklers, alarms, telephones, or water connections. The captain and the theater's fireman, William Sallers, discussed the deficiencies. Sallers did not report the matter directly to the fire chief, William Musham, concerned that he would be dismissed by the syndicate that owned the theater. When Captain Jennings reported the matter to his commanding officer, Battalion Chief John J. Hannon, he He was told that nothing could be done as the theater already had a fireman. The on-site firefighting equipment consisted of 6 Kill-Fire fire extinguishers. Kill-Fire was a form of dry chemical extinguisher, also sold for dousing chimney fires in residential houses. It consisted of a 2 by 24-inch tube of tin filled with about 3 pounds of white powder, mostly sodium bicarbonate. The user was instructed to forcibly hurl the contents on the tube at the base of the flames. The fire began high above the stage, so the Kill-Fire, when thrown, fell uselessly to the ground. On Wednesday, December 30th, 1903, the Iroquois presented a matinee performance of the popular Drury Lane musical Mr. Bluebeard, which had been playing at the theater since opening night. The play, a burlesque of the traditional Bluebeard folktale, featuring Dan McAvoy as Bluebeard and Eddie Foy as Sister Anne, a role that showcased his physical comedy skills. Dancer Bonnie Magan was also in the cast as Emer Dasher. Attendance since opening night had been disappointing as the result of poor weather, labor unrest, and other factors. The December 30th performance drew a much larger sellout audience. Tickets were sold for every seat in the house, plus hundreds more for the standing room areas at the back of the theater. Many of the estimated 2,100 to 2,200 patrons attending the matinee were children. The standing room areas were so crowded that some patrons sat in the aisles, blocking the exits. Shortly after the beginning of the second act, 8 men and 8 women were performing the double octet musical number in the pale moonlight, with the stage illuminated by blue-tinted spotlights to suggest a night scene. Sparks from an arc light ignited a muslin curtain, possibly as a result of an electrical short circuit. Lamp operator William McMullen testified that the lamp was placed too close to the curtain, but that stage managers had failed to offer a solution when he had first reported the problem. McMullen clapped at the fire when it started, but the flame quickly raced up the curtain and beyond his reach. Theater fireman William Sallers tried to douse the fire with the Kill-Fire canisters, but by that time it had spread to the fly gallery high above the stage, where several thousand square feet of highly flammable painted canvas scenery flats were hung. The stage manager tried to lower the asbestos fire curtain, but it snagged. Early reports stated that the asbestos curtain was stopped by the trolley wire that carried acrobats over the stage. But later investigation showed that the curtain had been blocked by a light reflector that protruded from under the proscenium arch. A chemist who later tested part of the curtain stated that it was composed mainly of wood pulp mixed with asbestos and would have been of no value in a fire. Foy, who had been preparing to take the stage, attempted to calm the crowd from the stage, first ensuring that his young son was in the care of a stagehand. He later wrote, "It struck me as I looked out over the crowd during the first act that I had never before seen so many women and children in the audience. Even the gallery was full of mothers and children." Foy was widely considered a hero after the fire for his courage in remaining on stage and pleading with patrons not to panic, even as large chunks of burning scenery landed around him.
The brief moment of calm was over. Chaos ensued.
By this time, many of the patrons on all levels were attempting to flee the theater. Some had found the fire exits hidden behind draperies on the north side of the building, but discovered that they could not open the unfamiliar bascule locks. Bar owner Frank Houseman, a former baseball player with the Chicago Colts, defied an usher who refused to open a door. He was able to open the door because his icebox at home had a similar lock. Houseman credited his friend outfielder Charlie Dexter, who had just quit the Boston Bean Eaters, with forcing open another door. A third door was opened either by brute force or by a blast of air, but most of the other doors could not be opened. Some patrons panicked, crushing or trampling others in a desperate attempt to escape. Many were killed while trapped in dead ends or while trying to open windows that appeared to be doors. The dancers on stage were also forced to flee, along with the performers backstage and in the numerous dressing rooms. Several performers and stagehands escaped through the building's main rear exit, which consisted of a large set of stock double doors, normally used for moving large fly sceneries and set pieces or props into the background area. When the door was opened, an icy wind blast rushed inside, fueling the flames with air and causing the fire to grow substantially larger. Many performers escaped through the coal hatch and through windows in the dressing rooms, and others tried to escape via the west stage door, which opened inward and became jammed as actors frantically pressed toward the door. A passing railroad agent saw the crowd pressing against the door and unfastened the hinges from the outside, allowing the actors and stagehands to escape. As the vents above the stage were nailed or wired shut, the fireball instead traveled outward, ducking under the stuck asbestos curtain and streaking toward the vents behind the dress circle and gallery 50 feet away. The hot gases and flames passed over the heads of those in the orchestra seats and incinerated flammable materials in the gallery and dress circle levels, including patrons still trapped in those areas. Those in the orchestra section exited into the foyer and out of the front door, but those in the dress circle and gallery who escaped the fireball could not reach the foyer because stairwells were blocked by high layers of fallen victims. Although iron grates that blocked secondary stairways during performances to prevent patrons in the cheaper seats from sneaking downstairs to the more expensive lower levels were still in place, first responders found very few victims near the gates. The largest death toll was at the base of the stairways, where hundreds of people were trampled, crushed, or asphyxiated. People who were able to escape using the emergency exits on the north side found themselves on fire escapes, one of which was improperly installed, causing people to trip upon exiting the fire escape door. Many jumped or fell from the icy, narrow fire escapes to their deaths, and the bodies of the first jumpers broke the falls of those who followed them. Students from the Northwestern University building north of the theater tried bridging the gap with a ladder and then with some boards between the rooftops, saving those few able to manage the makeshift crossover. The Iroquois had no fire alarm box or telephone. The CFD's Engine 13 was alerted to the fire by a stagehand who had been ordered to run from the burning theater to the nearest firehouse. On the way to the scene at approximately 3:33 p.m., a member of Engine 13 activated an alarm box to call additional units. Initial efforts focused on the people trapped on the fire escapes. The alley to the north of the theater, known as Couch Place, was icy, narrow, and full of smoke. Aerial ladders could not be used in the alley, and black nets, concealed by the smoke, proved useless. The Chicago Police Department became involved when an officer patrolling the theater district saw people emerge from the building in a panic, some with clothing on fire. The officer reported on the incident from a police box on Randolph Street, and police, summoned by whistles, soon converged on the scene to control traffic and aid with the evacuation. Some of the city's 30 uniformed police matrons were summoned because of the large number of female casualties. Mass panic ensued, and many of those trapped inside tried climbing over piles of bodies in order to escape. Corpses were stacked 10 feet high around some of the blocked exits. The victims were asphyxiated by the fire, smoke, and gases, or were crushed by the onrush of others behind them. It is estimated that 575 people were killed on the day of the fire, and at least 30 more died of injuries over the following weeks. Many of the dead were buried in Montrose, Calvary, St. Boniface, Mount Hope, Mount Olivet, Oakwoods, Rose Hill, Graceland, Forest Home and Waldheim Jewish cemeteries. Of the approximately 300 actors, dancers, and stagehands, only 5 people died. Aerialist Nellie Reed, an actor in a bit part, an usher, and 2 female attendants. Reed's role was to fly as a fairy over the audience on a trolley wire, showering them with pink carnations. She was trapped above the stage while waiting for her entrance, and during the fire she fell and died of burns and internal injuries 3 days later. The risks inherent in flammable scenery and props were recognized even in 1903. 2 features a safety curtain that confines fire to the stage area and smoke doors that allow smoke and heat to escape through the roof above the stage, combined to increase fire safety in theaters. This arrangement creates negative pressure. The stage area becomes a chimney, and fresh, breathable air is sucked through the exit doors into the audience area. At the Iroquois, the smoke doors above the stage were fastened closed. This meant that smoke flowed out of the building through many of the same exits through which people were trying to escape. Skylights on the roof of the stage, which were intended to open automatically during a fire and allow smoke and heat to escape, were fastened closed. The curtain was not tested periodically, and it became stuck when the theater personnel tried to lower it. The curtain was not fireproof. Curtains made with asbestos interwoven with wire create a strong and effective barrier against fire. The asbestos curtain at the Iroquois not only failed to lower, but also proved to be both weak and flammable. Chemist Gustav J. Johnson of the Western Society of Engineers analyzed a piece of the material after the fire. It was largely wood pulp. By mixing pulp with asbestos fiber, the life of the curtain is prolonged, the cost is cheapened, and the wire foundation may be dispensed with. It results in a curtain that may get inside city ordinances, but is of no value in a fire. Curtain material was rendered irrelevant by the 500 square foot triangular gap beneath the partly jammed curtain that functioned as a flue for the backdraft fireball that hurled into the auditorium at 3:50 p.m. Eyewitnesses testified that the curtain was still in place when the fireball passed through the gap. The owners of the theater claimed that the 30 exits would allow everyone inside to escape the building within 5 minutes. Audiences in 1903 were aware of the hazards of fires in theaters, especially after at least 384 people died in the Ring Theater fire in Vienna, Austria. Some exit doors opened inward into the auditorium, and others employed a bascule-type European latch, unfamiliar to many people, that prevented the door from opening when the crowd pressed against it. When people were able to pull the doors open enough to escape, some people were then wedged in the door opening as people continued to push on the door. Today, exit doors open outward so that people trying to escape will tend to hold the doors open. There were no exit signs on fire escape exits, and doors were concealed behind drapery. On the ground floor, the drapery was intact after the fire, but in the balconies, drapery was destroyed by the fireball. Theater staff had never experienced a fire drill. They were unfamiliar with exits, and some refused to open locked exit doors. The theater had no emergency lighting, and auditorium lights had been dimmed for the moonlight act on the stage at the time when the fire erupted. The electric switch box, located directly between the initiation point of the fire, was soon destroyed, darkening the entire auditorium, with the only illumination coming from the flames on the stage. During performances, some lesser trafficked stairways were blocked with iron gates to prevent people with inexpensive tickets from taking seats in other parts of the theater. On the day of the fire, there were no empty seats. Had such gates been located in primary stairways, the death toll would have been higher. First responders reported that few victims were found at the iron gates. Many of the exit routes were confusing. There were several ornamental doors that looked like exits, but were not. 200 people died in one passageway that was not an exit. Iron fire escapes on the north wall led to at least 125 deaths. People were trapped on all levels because the icy, narrow stairs and ladders were dangerous and because smoke and flames blocked the way down. The stairs on one fire escape exit from the second floor gallery had not been adjusted to accommodate a last-minute engineering alteration during construction that raised the level of the gallery floor inside the auditorium. As a result, the fire escape landing was 2 feet lower than the theater floor, causing people to stumble and fall onto the landing.
George M. Cohan and his Royal Family. Books and lyrics, music, and directed by George M. Cohan. Printed by Sam Dubinsky. That must be Cohan's alias. He said he takes care of himself in billing as George M. Cohan.
You don't have to memorize that one, kid. There's plenty more all over town.
I'd like to forget it. Say, is he as good as Foy?
Who?
Foy. Eddie Foy. Oh, pardon me.
Pardon me, I didn't quite catch the name. Would you mind spraying it again?
Eddie Foy. The star that's got the big show down the street with a chorus of 70.
Why, I thought they looked a little younger than that. I hear now that Cohan's in town, Foy's going to retire.
Foy won't retire till he's 90.
Is it going to take him that long to discover he has no talent? Why, they tell me when he tries to sing, the orchestra puts up umbrellas.
Tries to sing? Why, he's a genius. He keeps his audience glued to the seats.
The one, the only, the absolutely inimitable, Eddie Foy!
Alone on the empty stage, a blazing backdrop behind him, scenery flats in the loft above crackling and glowing red. Black smoke beginning to billow around the top of the proscenium arch, and bits of canvas raining down like burning confetti. Dodging some burning brands, he stepped to the edge of the footlights, partially clothed in his ludicrous costume, and begged what was left of the audience to remain calm. "Don't get excited," he shouted. "Sit down, it will be all right. There's no danger. Take it easy." Remarkably, some of those in the parquet down front took their seats once again. Some even sat down momentarily in the gallery. The audience was shrinking back in fascinated horror, leaving behind a trail of coats, scarves, boas, purses, hats, opera glasses, and other belongings in a mad dash for safety. Some tried to push past others, forcing their way up the aisles. Others remained sitting or standing, rooted to the spot, transfixed. 11-year-old Lester Linvingston of Hyde Park, seated down front, was awestruck. He saw Foy dashing on stage and catching a piece of burning paper, which had sailed down from above. "See, I'm a good catcher," the comedian lamely joked to anyone within earshot. "I was so interested in watching Foy," Lester said, "that I didn't realize what was happening." Heavy black smoke continued to pour from beneath the arch over the stage. When the double octet's performance suddenly stopped, the music stopped too. Many in the pit were scrambling to get out, stumbling over chairs, instruments, stands, and piles of sheet music. But Herbert DeLea and a handful of his musicians bravely remained. From the edge of the stage, Foy glanced down and urged the musical director to play. "An overture, Herbert, an overture. Play, start an overture, play anything. Keep your orchestra up, keep your music going." The 6 musicians struck up the overture to an earlier Claude Erlanger fairy tale production, Sleeping Beauty and the Beast. Alone on the burning stage, larger pieces of flaming scenery dropping around him, his wig now singed and smoking. Foy's mind whirled with fragments of unanswerable questions. "I thought of my boy again," he said. "Maybe this man didn't take him out. Why hadn't the curtain come down? What would happen to the women and children? Could I stop a stampede? Where in God's name was the stage manager? Did anyone know how to bring that damned iron curtain down? Why couldn't someone just cut the wire?" Once again, he tried to address the auditorium, but this time he did not tell people to keep their seats. "Take your time, folks," he pleaded. "Don't be frightened. Go slow. Walk out calmly. Take your time. But he dropped his voice to say to some stagehands on the brink of fleeing, "Lower that iron curtain! Drop the fire curtain! For God's sake, does anyone know how this iron curtain is worked?" The crackling of the timbers above increased. Foy said later, and I repeated for the last time, get out slowly," but no one was listening. His eyes swept the semi-lit auditorium. In the parquet, frightened people were moving quickly up the aisles in a somewhat orderly fashion, but what he could make out in the balcony and gallery terrified him. In the upper tiers, people were in a mad, animal-like stampede. Under the screaming and yelling, a sickening rumble reverberated throughout the house. Screaming, wailing adults and children clawed and fought their ways toward the exits by the light of the inferno raging behind them, which seemed to grow in intensity by the second. Mothers and children were wrenched away from each other and trampled underfoot by those behind them. Skirts, dresses, jackets, vests, trousers, and other articles of clothing were ripped to shreds as a human whirlpool of people tried to get through the exits and escape the advancing flames and asphyxiating smoke and fumes. The jamming at the doorways was horrible. Out of desperation, some of those whose clothing had caught fire jumped from the first balcony to the orchestra floor. Many died instantly, others were paralyzed and suffered agonizing deaths when they landed on seat backs or armrests. Those in the side boxes fared better than the others because the fireball missed them. Emil von Plachecki, a husky 24-year-old civil engineering student, was one of the standees in the gallery. As the fireball swept into his area, everyone started to scream, he said. "I felt my face burning. It felt like breathing a hot blast from a furnace." He pursed his lips and held his breath, and when he found that stairways leading from the gallery were blocked, suddenly remembered the washroom he had visited before the performance. It had no exit, but it did have a skylight. Using superhuman strength he hardly knew he possessed, the chunky young man pulled himself up 17 feet above the floor, hand over hand, on a stout window cord. Grasping the cord in his left hand, von Plachecki punched his way through a glass skylight, reinforced with wire mesh, and hauled himself onto the theater's snowy roof, where he bound his bleeding right hand with a tourniquet made from his clothing and waited in the cold until he was rescued by ladder. He had intended to find a ladder and lower it into the restroom so that others might escape, but he was too weak. Von Plachecki was rushed to a pharmacy where oil was poured on his blistered face, head, and arms, and his lacerated hand was treated. There were many heroic acts that afternoon. Georgia Swift, a young society woman badly shaken and bruised, had been sitting in the orchestra section. When I reached the back of the auditorium, she said, the aisle was choked with people who had fallen. I looked down to avoid stepping on them, and as I did, my eyes were caught by those of a little boy about 7 who was on the floor and unable to rise. He had large brown eyes and was so neat, he looked like a little gentleman. He fascinated me. It was all in a second, I know, but as he saw me looking at him, he said, "Won't you please help me? Please do." I stooped to raise him if I could, but the crowd was too thick and the rush too strong. I seized him under the arms and was then knocked over to my knees in the aisle. I struggled to my feet, but the weight of the crowd was such that I could not turn back, and I was carried on through the door. The little boy was unquestionably trampled to death, and the memory of those eyes will haunt me forever. Modern forensic science has identified 2 phases of death. Somatic death is the cessation of the vital processes. Molecular death is the progressive disintegration of the body tissues. For most of the victims inside the Iroquois, the end of life would have been classified as somatic death, which, tragically, came by varying degrees. At the first sign of fire, minutes before the blast of smoke and flames burst from under the safety curtain and into the auditorium, the adrenaline in virtually every man, woman, and child present, whether members of the audience or those backstage, would have begun pumping in the space of a millisecond. The two pyramid-shaped adrenal glands, one atop each kidney, are not among the body's larger organs. Each is about 2 inches in diameter, but in situations of sudden stress, like the theater fire, they would instantly have prepared the body for flight or fight. When one becomes frightened, the adrenals release large quantities of the hormone epinephrine into the blood system, which instantly help the body adjust to the sudden stress by increasing the rate and strength of the heartbeat, raising blood pressure, and speeding up the conversion of glycogen into glucose, providing a burst of energy to the muscles. For those trying to battle their way to the exits, this adrenaline rush would have propelled them on in their desperate attempts to escape. But once the victims had become trapped in the doorways or hit by the blast of fire, other bodily processes would have rapidly occurred. Some people were immediately overcome by inhaling poisonous gases or fumes containing deadly carbon monoxide produced by the incomplete combustion of wood or paint. Fumes and smoke from the scenery may also have contained equally deadly cyanide. The degree of saturation of these chemicals in the bloodstreams, together with soot clogging the air passages of the lungs, could have produced a quick death with no physical signs of disfiguration, as was the case with some of those caught in their seats. If they survived the smoke and flames, their next biggest risk was dying from shock or burn injuries as bodily fluids rushed to the skin. If fluids are not replenished quickly enough, organs can die for lack of blood. There is also what is known as delayed death from smoke inhalation. Lungs badly damaged from chemical burns caused by poisonous gases can fill with so much fluid that the victim dies days or weeks later. Then there were those seared by the flames. For them, the end would have come quickly. The body exposed to fire often assumes what is called the pugilistic attitude, in which the flexor or bicep muscles contract so that the victim's arms in particular are outstretched and fixed in an attitude commonly adopted by boxers. This pugilistic attitude is evidence of exposure of the body to intense heat. Among the bodies, one journalist would note that day, a strange uniformity was observed. In nearly every case, the victim's left arm was held stiff and close to the side, while the right arm was stretched out as if warding off peril. Those who were trampled or were piled on top of one another in the doorways died in still another way by traumatic or crush asphyxia, a particularly horrific end. The victim of such crushing would have experienced the sensation of tremendous pressure on the body, pressure sufficient enough to fracture ribs. If the person was conscious, they might have felt as if their head were about to explode, or their eyes pop out. Those victims of the Iroquois who lost consciousness immediately were the fortunate ones. Slow asphyxia can take 2 to 3 minutes to kill. Such was the fate of those trapped inside what had been advertised as the best theater on earth. But even as men, women, and children died by the hundreds and the piles of bodies grew higher inside the building, scenes equally devastating were occurring outside in Couch Place. It would soon come to be known as Death Alley. Before Engine 13 and the other units began arriving, the best theater on earth had been transformed into an oven. In collecting valuables after the fire, police found at least a dozen watches, all of which had stopped at about the same time, 3:50 p.m. That meant that, incredibly, 17 minutes had elapsed from the time the gongs first began to clang in City Hall. That would account for the jamming at the exits, and the reason why relatively few people were seen exiting the theater. Eyewitness reports varied. William Grover, manager of the high-rise Unity building, more than a block away, calculated that perhaps as much as 7 minutes had gone by from the time flames first burst through the theater's skylight before any person left the Iroquois. My office on the 15th floor commands a view of the entire theater, he said. I was startled by a loud explosion and concussion that rattled windows, and, returning to the window, I saw a sheet of flame shooting from the roof. I watched that fire 7 minutes, and in that time, not a soul came out of the front doors. Then the flames died down, and people began to come out in scores. After that, it was a steady blaze until it was put out. Grover's field of vision was the front of the theater on Randolph Street and did not include the side bordering on Couch Place. There, in the narrow alley separating the Iroquois from the Northwestern University building, another horrible scene was taking place before the eyes of petrified students. Though it was the Christmas holiday, some of them were in the building that day, along with a group of painters and workmen who were repairing damage to some classrooms from an earlier fire. What they witnessed was further evidence of the rushed, incomplete job done by the Fuller Company and its subcontractors. The highest fire escape was simply a metal platform with no ladder to the ground. Though the theater had been open for nearly 6 weeks, no one had bothered to complete the work. One of the Northwestern undergraduates was George Dunlap, 22, of Chicago, who said, I was passing one of the classrooms where the painters were working, and I looked across the alley and saw fire coming out of the theater exits and people fighting to get out, but they were so jammed in, nobody was getting out. I called the painters to let us put some of their planks or ladders across to the fire escapes. Run it out! Run it out! One of the painters shouted. He and other workmen shoved a 26-foot ladder across the alley to rest on the railing of a fire escape platform. They watched in horror as a man, crazed with fear, started to cross the improvised bridge as flames burst out of the exit beneath him. As he began edging his way across, the ladder slipped from an icy window ledge of the university building, and the man plummeted, screaming to his death, on the slushy cobblestones 50 feet below. After the ladder was lost, 3 wide boards were pushed across to the theater, and the painters anchored them with their knees. Come on, they shouted to 16-year-old Hortense Lang, who was pulling her terrified 11-year-old sister Irene by the arm. The 2 girls were the first ones to make it across the plank bridge. I was going to jump, Hortense sobbed. But I thought of my mother. I just grabbed Irene by the hand and waited for the planks. I don't know how we crossed. They and their mother, who had also escaped unharmed, were later reunited in the Northwestern building, where they held hands and wept for an hour. Rachel Gorman of the Sisters of Charity was especially courageous. She crawled a foot or so out on the boards, steadied herself by holding onto a window frame, held out her arm, and helped some people to safety. The plank bridge worked for a while, but it could not handle the crush spilling out of the theater. We went over and tore people loose, wrote the student George Dunlap, and the painters helped them across the planks. We did that until the curtain on the stage let out a terrible roar and no one came out of the door. We got 36 people out and laid them on the floor in the classrooms. Some of the women's clothing had been torn away or was in flames. Not knowing what else to do, the young student pulled tubes of kill fire from the wall hooks and tossed the powder on the burning clothes. When I threw it on their burns, they stopped screaming, he said. He guessed it was because the powder kept air from reaching their wounds. One survivor later admitted that she was temporarily outraged at the young student because even though the chemical powder smothered the flames around her waist, some of the stuff accidentally got tossed into her mouth as she was screaming. When what sounded like a bomb went off inside the theater, those at the university's windows on different floors watched helplessly as people trapped in the theater tried to escape. What they saw was beyond imagination. Those who swarmed from the exits and were pushed to the edge of the iron railings discovered there was no place to go. The highest platform had no steps, and on the other landings, if anyone attempted to descend through the blinding smoke, they were forced back by flames bursting out the lower exit doors and windows. Compounding the horror was that those who made it to the fire escapes found it impossible to turn back because of the crush behind them. Some of the trapped people tried crawling across the planks, but in the smoke and confusion, most missed their footing and plummeted to the street. Others, whose clothing was on fire, simply gave up and jumped from the railings. The boards and ladders began falling away, and as the fire increased and flames shot out of the doors and windows along the theater's wall, many were burned to death in full view of the students. From some of the higher Northwestern University windows, they looked into the theater at what appeared to be one solid wall of flames. In the inferno, they could see men, women, and children running about. The victims did not look human. One witness described them as crawling things. Mrs. F.R. Baldwin of Minneapolis and her mother, both of whom had been seated next to one of the fire escapes, had taken only 3 or 4 steps before the crowd from behind flung them through the open door. Miraculously, neither mother nor daughter were seriously hurt, but as she rose to her feet, Mrs. Baldwin saw a girl lying on one of the fire escape platforms, with flames shooting over her through a window. Something else would forever haunt her. One man who had jumped from a platform about 6 feet off the ground had not taken 2 steps before a woman who jumped a moment later from a height of about 40 feet came down right on him, killing him on the spot. Couch Place was a smoking, flaming hell, too narrow for effective aerial ladder work. In that narrow alley, swarming with people, William Sallers at last found Captain Jennings, told him that people were cut off, and helped Engine 13's pipemen drag the nozzle end of a hose line up the lower iron stairs. The water came at once, he said, and I hollered, "Play away, 13!" The pressure was reduced slightly so that firefighters could drench those victims whose clothing was on fire. If the full force of the stream had struck them, it was feared that the victims might have been pushed back into the flames. Firemen heard pounding from behind iron-shuttered doors and windows. They tried to wrench them open with axes and claw bars. Above them, people, many of whom were being burned alive, were pushed onto the unfinished fire escape platform, which led nowhere. Body after body thudded onto the cobblestones. At first, the firefighters tried using nets to catch the jumpers, but the mesh was woven of black material, and in the dense smoke, impossible to see. They were useless. Countless numbers of people leapt from the fire escapes that afternoon, and the ones who survived did so only because they landed on the bodies of those who had preceded them.
Snow is falling everywhere. Snow is falling all the time. All the time.
No one had exact figures of how many people made it across the improvised plank bridge, but 125 victims were removed from the slushy cobblestones in Couch Place that afternoon. Ruthie Thompson had no memory of being carried out of the theater through the scenery doors, but, like something out of a nightmare, she recalled waves of black cloth streamed over me. For one moment, I thought I was dead, but I wasn't even hurt. Ruthie had fallen to the ground and crawled beneath the raised edge of the theater's carriage step. For what must have seemed like an eternity, the child had remained wedged into a small opening, while a torrent of people had swept over me. I crouched there until no one else came out, and then I stood up and looked around. She would always recall seeing panic-stricken people, firemen, hoses, swarms of humanity, running up and down the alley. In a Northwestern classroom, George Dunlap had run into an unexpected problem. Before blankets and sheets had arrived from nearby department stores, there were many female victims lying on the floor, naked. Some guy kept gawking at them. I told him 3 times to get some cans of Kill Fire hanging in the hall. He didn't go. I got mad and swung a half-empty can, and it struck him on the forehead, and down he went. I figured I had killed him. He lay there a long time. When police arrived and Dunlap explained what had happened, one officer was so outraged that he went for his revolver, threatening to shoot the unconscious student. Dunlap stopped him by saying that the young man was already dead. The officers hurried on, and the student who had been knocked out later regained consciousness and disappeared. William Bray of Michigan City, Indiana, hit upon the perfect Christmas gift for his 12-year-old daughter, a trip to a musical comedy in a sumptuous new theater in the big city of Chicago. As a clerk, William's wages were modest, but as an employee at the Michigan Central Railroad, he knew how to get the best fare available. Bringing joy to his daughter, Harriet, had a particular significance that year. Her mother, his wife of 19 years, Emma Bookling Bray, had suffered from tuberculosis for 2 years and was growing weaker. In fact, she lost her battle with the disease 3 weeks later. Putting a smile on Harriet's face with the theater excursion meant putting one on Emma's face too, a gift that couldn't be put beneath the Christmas tree. In the years after his wife's death, he may have found a bit of solace from having been able to save Harriet from the Iroquois fire, though he'd been unable to save Emma from tuberculosis and from having spared Emma the agony of losing a child. William had purchased balcony seats on the 2nd floor. When the fire began, her father had grabbed her hand, and, with the aid of a stranger, the 3 made their way through the intense heat and smoke to one of the fire escapes. Harriet remembered the human stampede, people jumping over bodies, and the terror when her father discovered that the fire exit door on their level was jammed. My father and this other fellow pounded and banged until the door opened. From there, we descended down the fire escape, only to find that the last flight of steps was also jammed. Her clothing and hair singed. Harriet waited for her father to jump the remaining 12 feet to the ground and then catch her in his arms. By then, the firemen were on the scene. I'll always remember crawling beneath the legs of the horses who pulled the fire equipment and how they stood motionless in the face of all that chaos. Captain Edward Buckley of Engine 32 was credited as being the first officer inside the theater who began evacuating victims from the front of the building. It was there, in Randolph Street, not far from the entrance, that one of his men bent low over a woman to catch her last words. "My child, my poor little boy, is he safe? Tell me he's safe and I can die." "He is safe," said the fireman, forcing back tears. The woman died, and the fireman covered her body with a blanket and carried it away. He knew nothing about her son. Boisterous, rowdy Chicago, for the first time in its history, prepared to welcome the new year in silence. On the morning of December 31st, those who had not heard the newsboys' cries of "Extra!" the previous evening, or learned of the tragedy by word of mouth, awoke to stunning banner headlines and long and incomplete lists of the identifiable dead and injured. The news was as incredible to the citizenry as it would seem nearly 100 years later when the World Trade Center towers collapsed in New York. The Tribune spread across its entire front page a list of the dead, along with 200 names of the injured people, some of whom were not expected to live. It ran also a box identifying 13 morgues holding remains. Never before had the city received a blow so instantaneously shocking. There was scarcely a neighborhood that was not touched in some way by the tragedy. Instead of the usual sounds of celebration ushering in the new year of 1904, the predominating sounds in Chicago were the tolling of church bells and the soft patter and empty streets of horses' hooves, muffled by new-fallen snow. Wheeled traffic seemed devoted to the transportation of flowers to homes with black crepe on the doors. Black crepe seemed to be everywhere. Mayor Harrison hurried home by train from a trip to Oklahoma and declared a week of official mourning, banning all unnecessary noise, including band music, the tooting of horns, and train, boat, and factory whistles. Flags were flown at half-mast. The Board of Education announced a delay in the start of the new semester out of respect for the more than 40 teachers and principals who had perished in the fire. The frightful thing was over before the city knew what had happened. The news left paralysis behind, said the Tribune. Chicago, reported the New York Clipper, enters upon the new year silently, dumb with the shock of disaster and speechless with the anguish of sudden and awful calamity. Lives sacrificed to someone's carelessness. Thousands of Americans had drowned that year and died in railroad accidents, but the 600 or so who had lost their lives and the hundreds of others who were injured in a place of amusement touched a nerve in America and throughout much of the world. Of those who attended the matinee performance, 150 of the dead were men, 3 times that number were women, and most heartbreaking of all, 150 were children. Other than the terrible natural disaster, the Galveston hurricane in 1900, nothing in the new century came close to the Iroquois catastrophe in the continental United States. The horror cut across class lines. Bankers and railroad executives searched morgues along with clerks and domestic servants, among them the few black people who had been in the theater that day. Some children made it home by themselves. 2 frightened little Aurora girls, aged 12 and 14, walked into the offices of a manufacturing company not far from the theater. They said they were staying with an adult family friend and had been allowed to attend the performance on their own. Somehow they escaped from the theater. They were so shaken they didn't know what to do. Their story touched an employee who took them to a train station and bought them 2 tickets to Aurora. They were among the fortunate ones. Theodore Chabad, 12, had gone to the show with his 14-year-old sister Myrtle. Though he was badly injured, Theodore somehow fought his way out of the theater and staggered 8 city blocks in the bitter cold to the office of his father, attorney Henry Chabad. Once inside, he collapsed and never regained consciousness. Myrtle was found dead in the theater. Jesus fucking Christ. Dr. D.W. Alexander's son Boyer was found decapitated. He was identified by a pocket watch in his clothing. The watch had been a birthday gift from his father. John Dryden returned home after identifying his wife's body. On the parlor piano was a sheet of music she had been playing just before leaving for the theater. The title of the piece was Absence. The community of Kenosha, Wisconsin was staggered. The members of the prominent Henry Van Ingen family became separated as they tried to escape. The parents survived with burns, but their 5 children, Grace, Edward, John, Margaret, and Elizabeth, all died in the fire. The wealthy real estate man and his wife eventually recovered from their physical injuries, but were psychologically shattered. They never returned to their home, but moved to Tarrytown, New York, where they lived for the rest of their lives. The popular Cooper brothers of Kenosha decided to remain in their seats rather than risk the stampede for the exits. Their bodies were found near each other. Both had been asphyxiated. More than 24 hours after the disaster, a haggard man boarded a Cottage Grove Avenue cable car. In his arms, partially wrapped in a piece of canvas, was the body of a little girl with blonde curls. As he took a seat, the conductor eyed him suspiciously, approached, and tapped him on the shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said, "but the rules of the company do not permit the carrying of bodies in this manner. I must ask you to leave the car." Without the slightest change of expression, the exhausted man slowly rose, cradling the child in one arm. With his free hand, he pulled a large revolver from his pocket, pointed it in the conductor's face, and said with little emotion, "This is my daughter. I have looked for her all last night and all of today. I have not been able to get a cab or a carriage. I am taking my baby home to her mother, and I intend to take her on this car. Now go on." The car proceeded on its way. 43-year-old Mayor Harrison issued a string of edicts, closing first all theaters and places of public amusement with the exception of the Chicago Auditorium, which had a steel fire curtain, and then extending the closure to dime museums, dance halls, and other public buildings. Even hospitals were not spared. Some were told to stop admitting patients until the building department could make safety inspections. Thousands of people were affected. A coroner's inquest was launched to determine the exact cause of the fire, and a special blue ribbon committee of architects and builders was appointed to interview survivors and report directly to the mayor. But despite these quick responses, despite his assurances of immediate improvements in public safety, and his personal and obviously genuine solicitude for the bereaved, Carter Henry Harrison Jr., a reformed Democrat, the city's 30th mayor, and the first to be born in Chicago, would quickly find himself in the center of a controversy that would continue into 1904, and, at least for some of the victims' families, to the end of his political career. In the wake of the Iroquois disaster, the mayor accused aldermen of not acting fast enough on the critical study submitted by Building Commissioner George Williams 2 months before the tragedy. Harrison declared that if anyone was to blame for the fire, they were, because they had suspended action on a new city theater ordinance, saying that it needed further examination. Theater owners Davis and Powers rushed to provide an implausible excuse in a statement issued to Chicago papers. When the blaze first broke out, they said, the house firemen threw the contents of the kill fire, which would have been more than enough if the product had been effective to have extinguished the flame at once, but for some cause inherent in the tube of kill fire, it had no effect. Then they blamed the victims. The audience was promptly admonished and importuned by persons on the stage and in the auditorium to be calm and avoid any rush. They added that the exits and facilities for emptying the theater were ample to enable them all to get out without confusion. They concluded this specious statement, saying that no expense or precaution was omitted to make the theater as fireproof as it could be made. There being nothing combustible in the construction of the house except the trimmings and furnishings of the stage, and in building the theater, we sacrificed more space to aisles and exits than any theater in America. In an exemplary example of poor timing, to say nothing of bad taste, Will Davis's wife, the actress and singer Jessie Bartlett Davis, joined the fray from Philadelphia, where she was performing. She, too, blamed the theater victims for the disaster, claiming that it was the actors whose lives were regularly in danger. It is the fault of the public that such things occur. In these swift days, the public is not satisfied with good, quiet shows, she declared. They must have lots of excitement, color, and lights, with the result that every actor takes his life in his hands when he goes before the footlights. She added, I do not understand how the asbestos curtain failed to work. Mr. Davis drilled his men every day in the use of the apparatus and in the dropping of the curtain. Never before was there any hitch. The claim that the kill fire had failed to work was immediately challenged by one alderman who said the theater's management had been explicitly warned about the inadequacy of the product after a member of his staff, a former veteran city fireman, had visited the theater 1 day before the tragedy, said the alderman. A member of the theater's management was warned by the former firefighter that the fire apparatus you have here would do no more good than a bucket of water in a sawmill. But the fireman was told to mind his own business. He was not running the theater. Powers was accused of buying cheap, inferior material for the asbestos curtain in order to save money. The local manager of the Johns Manville Company said that a pure asbestos curtain would have stood the test of the Iroquois fire. If it had been woven properly, it would have sufficient tensile strength to withstand any wind pressure, provided it was properly supported at the top and sides. Johns Manville wasted no time in distancing itself from the episode, taking out a prominent ad in at least one theatrical paper. Asbestos curtains that stop fires are pure asbestos interwoven with brass wire. The Iroquois theater curtain was not one of ours.
Alright, let's do this. 1, 2, 3.
The press, not just in Chicago, was unanimous in its condemnation of the theater owners and the city administration. Harrison's closings of Chicago theaters was criticized as too little and too late. 1 day after the fire, the Tribune reflected the anger, shock, and disbelief of the city, if not the nation. The theater had just been built and inspected. It had been built by artisans whom, in our moments of national pride, we call the cleverest in the world. It had been inspected by officials whom recent public indignation was supposed to have awakened to some sense of public duty. It was a modern building, constructed with modern requirements. It was said, and it was supposed to be the fact, that the building was not only a fireproof one, but that every device which human ingenuity, spurred by a desire to guard human life, could think of had been installed, that abundant precautions were taken, and that the theater at last was safe. Yet, that is the theater which has gained a terrible celebrity. The dead cannot be called to life, but the other theaters of Chicago can be inspected in light of the dread illumination of the Iroquois fire. The New York Herald took the historic view. Not since the burning of the Ring Theater in Vienna in 1881 has any disaster occurred in its magnitude and horror with the destruction of the Iroquois. It is necessary to turn to the greatest cataclysms of nature, like the eruption of Mont Pelée, which overwhelmed Martinique, for anything to match it for sudden and wholesale dealing of death. Carter Harrison quickly moved to tamp down criticism of his administration and the theater management by choosing certain aldermen to make speeches urging public calm and moderation at the first city council meeting since the fire. The Inter-Ocean, for one, noted the tactic, describing Harrison's precautions as puerile, futile, and craven. Those are all $5 words. As the days passed, the Chicago Tribune expressed mounting indignation. In all justice, it must be said that the chief responsibility rests upon the city administration, which, either through carelessness, sloth, or ignorance, or because it had incapable and corrupt servants, or from a mistaken sense of security, chose to let those theaters run themselves as they saw fit, without any reference to any measures for the protection of human life. Police made the first of many arrests, starting with 20 carpenters, stagehands, and even members of the Pale Moonlight Double Octet, some of whom were charged with involuntary manslaughter. The entertainers were actually held on a technicality so they might serve as witnesses. The same involuntary manslaughter charge was brought against the theater's co-owners, Davis and Powers, and Building Commissioner Williams, all of whom were placed under arrest. The arrest warrants were issued by Justice George Underwood at the insistence of Arthur Hull, the Chicago businessman who had lost his wife and 3 children in the tragedy, and whose wrenching comments were wired to every corner of the globe. "It is too terrible to contemplate," Hull said. "I can never go to my home again, to look at playthings left by the children, just where they put them, to see how my dear dead wife arranged the details of her home so carefully. The very walls ring with the names of my dear dead ones. I can never go there again. My wife and my children, all I ever had to live for, are gone. All that remains is for me to try to make someone pay for this carelessness. A few carpenters and stagehands have been arrested. Men who sang in the chorus are in jail. Such an investigation is a cruel mockery. The men who are responsible are allowed to walk the streets untouched, while a few laborers are punished. The authorities must understand that those who have suffered will not wait for them to dally along. There must be no politics or favoritism in this investigation." A national magazine, The Independent, formerly Harper's Weekly, put it succinctly. "It would appear as if there has been a conspiracy of catastrophe in the case of the Iroquois Theater." It was against this backdrop of fear, grief, rage, charge, and countercharge, accusation, denial, innuendo, contradiction, and confusion that the city of Chicago would witness one of the longest, strangest, most emotional and dramatic legal battles in its history. At 9 o'clock on the night of December 30th, 1903, as police and firemen probed the smoking ruins of the theater, the Chicago Daily News hit the streets with a 9 p.m. extra containing the first details of the great tragedy. A news editor had obviously selected secondary filler material to close up the empty space, the news hole in the pages of the paper where the Iroquois coverage ended. He randomly chose pieces from the AP Wire, which included financial briefs from around the U.S. and abroad. Given Chicago's extraordinary disaster story, these items probably received little or no attention from readers. Somewhere in the middle of the paper, at the bottom of one column, appearing just above an advertisement for the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, was one paragraph from London, dated December 30th, reporting that a steamship company had that day ordered a new vessel for its Atlantic fleet that would be larger than anything then afloat, and that construction would begin immediately at Belfast, Ireland. The vessel, christened the Adriatic, was completed in 1907 and served as the company's proud flagship under her owners. The White Star Line announced construction of a more state-of-the-art fleet of transatlantic steamers, which it called its Olympic class. The Adriatic, whose birth announcement was made public on the day the Iroquois died, was the immediate predecessor to the company's newest, safest, most technically advanced flagship, a greater, even more luxurious vessel that would, not unlike the Iroquois Theater, symbolize the technical superiority of the new modern century. Just as the Iroquois was called absolutely fireproof, this floating palace was termed unsinkable. She was the Titanic.